To make a piano keyboard case, first gather the needed materials. This includes fabric, foam, batting, and interfacing. Also, have scissors and measuring tape on hand. Select a durable, lightweight fabric for the exterior of the piano keyboard case. Cotton twill, polypoplin, or nylon are all acceptable choices. Measure your piano keyboard, and add 10 centimeters of fabric for the total measurements. Cut the fabric according to the measurements. Pin the exterior fabric to the wrong side of the foam. Sew them together, leaving a 2.5 centimeters seam allowance. Iron the seams. Place the batting between the exterior and interior fabrics, and pin them together. Sew the batting in place, using a 0.5 centimeters seam allowance around the edges. Fold the fabric in half lengthwise, and sew the edges together with a 5 centimeters seam allowance. Turn the case right side out and iron if needed. Trace and cut the shape of the piano keyboard case on the interfacing. Iron the interfacing onto the wrong sides of the fabric. Pin the interfacing pieces together, and sew them with a 1.25 centimeters seam allowance. Iron the seams, if desired. Trace the shape of the keyboard onto the foam, and cut the pieces. Place the foam pieces onto the right side of the fabric and iron them in place. Place the keyboard case with the right side facing down on a flat surface. Pin the batting onto the wrong side of the case. Sew the batting into place, using a 0.5 centimeters seam allowance. Iron the case to flatten the seam. Place the two interfacing pieces onto the wrong sides of the fabric and pin them together. Sew the interfacing together, with a 0.5 centimeters seam allowance. Iron the seams if desired. Turn the case right side out and iron it to flatten the seams. Place the keyboard onto the foam and sew the case shut, leaving a 4 centimeters seam allowance. Place the batting onto the interior of the piano keyboard case and pin into place. Sew it into the case, using a 0.5 centimeters seam allowance. Place the two interfacing pieces on the wrong sides of the fabric and pin them together. Sew the interfacing pieces together, leaving a 1.25 centimeters seam allowance. Iron the seams if desired. Turn the case right side out and iron it flat. Place the keyboard onto the foam and sew the case shut, leaving a 4 centimeters seam allowance. Trace the bottom and top edges of the piano onto the foam and cut the pieces to size. Place the top and bottom pieces of foam onto the piano keyboard case, and pin them to the fabric. Sew the foam pieces to the fabric, using a 0.5 centimeters seam allowance. Iron the seam for a cleaner finish. Trace the handle pattern onto the fabric and cut two identical pieces. Pin the two handle pieces together and sew them, using a 0.5 centimeters seam allowance. Iron the seam for a neater finish. Place the handle onto the piano keyboard case, and sew it onto the case, leaving a 4 centimeters seam allowance. Trace the desired pattern of the straps onto the fabric and cut two identical pieces.